Welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, this week we have a rather unusual topic, the Indian boardroom, which actually is not unlike our Indian political scenario, where we try and replace the old with the young, but the old have this uncanny habit of staging a comeback coup. But is this battle ideological, or is it a cultural misfit, or is it all to do with governance? To discuss this with me on the roundtable is Sandeep Bamzai. He is the Editor-in-Chief of the Financial Chronicle. We have Dilip Cherian, Image Guru, and someone who has the inside view on a lot of multiple corporate battles. And of course, Gurcharan Das. He's a former CEO of Procter Gamble and also an author. We have Pranjal Sharma. He's an economist and a commentator. Dilip, I'll begin with you since you have a somewhat ringside view on such battles. Why do you think this happens? Is it because the old don't want to let go? Is it to do with control, or is it to do with something else altogether?
I think it's a mixture of factors. But if you look at several of the big high-profile ones just now in the air, they're all to do with what is called continued thekedari. I own the company, I used to own it, or I started it, or my father started it, or whatever, and therefore I must be the boss. And I think the segue into professionalizing these companies and acting like shareholders and demanding returns, which is your fair demand, is at the core of many of these battles. And I think you've got to distinguish between takeover battles and battles of succession. And I'm talking about battles of succession.
Well, we've seen, so there's two battles in recent times come to mind, the Ratan Tata versus Cyrus Mistry and of course the Infosys battle. Where would you categorize these?
Well, I think both battles have diminished India Incorporated. And the fact is that capitalism matures when you separate in the end ownership and management. When you separate the interest of the family or the founders or the promoters and the interests ultimately of the professional managers. And so, you know, we have a saying in India, Haveli ki umar 60 saal. Now, what this says is that businesses have a tendency to decline, and in 60 years, it's dust to dust. And the fact is that the first generation makes money. The second generation has money. They don't want more money, they want power. And the third generation has money and power. And what do they want? They want art, they want respectability, they want philanthropy. So they want to be respected in a different sort of way. And there's no one to look after the business, and the business collapses, and the business comes to an end. Now, in the case of Infosys and Tata's, the cautionary tale is that Tatas have resisted this law for 150 years. But the return of Ratan Tata was a threat to this professionalizing of management. And in the same way, if Infosys wants to be a company that goes on for 100 years, it too will have to resist shareholders, specific shareholders, promoters, intervening in this whole battle. It has, however, raised an interesting question. What are the rights of shareholders, say with 13%? Do they have a right to special information, which may be confidential? At 26%, we know it's well defined what the rights are. But what is it for someone who has got 3% shares, etc.? So I personally think that this is it's a moment for India. While both Ratan Tata and Narayana Murthy had a good point, there were issues, real issues, but this was not the way to express those issues. You should do these things quietly, you know.
But you think they have a point. Pranjal, would you agree that they did have a case? Maybe the way they expressed it was wrong.
I think I'm on this point. I would mildly disagree with Dilip and partly agree with Gurcharan ji, because I think that as a founder, you have a right to protect the company that you created. And here the issues which were raised were of corporate governance, and the information that is out in the public domain, both about Cyrus Mistry as well as Vishal Sikka, there are serious questions on how they behaved while they were in position of influence and power. They had executive powers. I think even if a founder has stepped out of the board, that founder, as a shareholder who is deeply committed, has every right to question the people who are running the company. Now, I'm not sure whether this should be looked at succession.
Doesn't that create another power center, though?
Well, there is.
I mean, if you create finally, the job of a promoter is to create. I mean, is to hand over to a professional board, which they did. Who appoints?
But sir, the accountability to stakeholders remains, which include the shareholders, important shareholders beyond the board, and also the other regulatory bodies which are governing what a company is doing. So to say that once you hand over to a professional management, the management is not answerable to anybody outside the board, I would not agree. Okay. I think there is accountability outside the board.
And Sandeep, accountability outside the board, we are told the SEBI also wants to bring in more rules of governing these bodies. They've been looking at these two cases.
But, ironically, there are similarities in the Tata and Infosys case, but yet there are differences. Let's understand. You have Ratan Tata, who appoints Cyrus Mistry over his half-brother Noel Tata. Ignores the credentials of Ishaq Hussain, etc., who are internal candidates, and brings in a shareholder's son as the boss of Tata Sons. And then over time decides that Cyrus Mistry is not performing, so he needs to go. And since I control 66% of the Tata Trusts, through Tata Trusts I control 66% of Tata Sons, I have the caveat to remove him, and then we know what happened. In this specific case, there is a marked distinction that needs to be made. Here the founder, particularly Narayan Murthy, who is representing that 12.75% block, is saying that there is malfeasance in the company. And the extent of the malaise is such that it needs to be checked. So there is a huge difference between the two. There was no malfeasance, there was no malaise, there was no financial defalcation as far as Cyrus Mistry is concerned. Let's make that very clear. In this case, Panaya stinks. If you read the whistleblower's account, which we have reproduced over the last 3 days, the whistleblower's account is, and remember, the whistleblower brought down Ranbaxy. So this whistleblower's account was constantly being shoved under the carpet by Vishal Sikka. Then there are questions of personal nepotism, personal corruption against Vishal Sikka. The board has agreed that Vishal Sikka spent XYZ money on private charters, on taking his family to Mauritius, etc. They recovered 60 lakh rupees from Vishal Sikka, which is unprecedented in Infosys history.
But he has the board support still.
But that's the whole point.
That's it. That's what you need to understand. The board was his. That is why the board has been recast. Now, what are the questions? The questions is that a long-time CFO, a groupie, 15 years in the company, refuses to sign off on a particular deal because he believes that it is inflated. That deal is with a company where the CEO or founder is ex-SAP. Hasso Plattner is his name. SAP is the same company that Vishal Sikka was involved with. Ritika Suri, the head of M&A, who also signed off, is also part of SAP earlier and now Infosys. I mean, there are too many questions that.
So he basically, what he's saying is basically they bought a company, an employee bought a company of his former boss's company.
And paid 38 million excess.
So the question is that there might be some rational answers to this.
Compare the two cases.
Question is very simple. The boards today do not smell of roses. Corporate governance, since the crisis we saw, which was a turning point of Satyam's clash, I would say Indian boards are not as evolved as they should be. There are still issues of conflict of interest. There are still issues of the independence of the independent directors. And I think
of course, in this case again it's the same. I'll give you an example. 15, 17 years ago, maybe earlier, 20 years ago, I am at an industrialist's house because I'm supposed to travel with him from Bombay to Calcutta. This is early morning at about 7 o'clock. The industrialist arrives from Dubai. I will not name the industrialist. The industrialist arrives from Dubai.
Prizes for guessing.
And the board is waiting in his house. In the industrialist's residence, there is a dining room, which can be called a boardroom because it's a rather large dining table. The board members wait there. The industrialist walks in. The board members walk in, whatever resolution has to be passed or changed is done, the door is shut. Within 5 minutes, the industrialist comes out. Mind you, the industrialist has already appointed himself lifetime chairman of the company. But that is an aside.
This is reminding me too much of a Congress working committee meeting.
It is exactly like a CWC. The door is shut, the door is open, the flamboyant industrialist walks out and says, Acha, ready hai? Ready. Okay, so we leave for the airport, where we get into his jet and leave for Calcutta. Why? Because he has to attend the races, Calcutta races on New Year's Day.
No, but I think
we've all guessed who this person is.
But I think the point here is
it a family-owned firm?
It's all family-owned firm.
I'm saying look at how every whatever checks and balances exist in the system are being just cast aside or tossed out of the window. It is, I mean, those independent directors are also part of, this is a big company I'm talking about.
Yeah. But you know, what the real thing that we have to watch out for is that all these so-called family interests have, out of choice, diminished themselves into a shareholding position where they are in the single digits of shareholders. Now, we have every reason to castigate the kind of independent directors and the way they are appointed.
And the auditor.
And I think this is,
and the auditor.
And this is, I think, where our New Companies Act and SEBI and a whole bunch of other people who are supposed to do this, the Company Law Board, all have moved to the sidelines for convenience. Because as Indians, we have a lot of, unnecessary, in my view, respect for the so-called founders or the founding families. That, exactly like in political parties, where you have a culture of bowing, scraping, and brown-nosing in that sequence, is because of the fact that the companies are still able to give all kinds of freebies, whether it's a family holiday.
Raymond is an example, another example that is taking place before our eyes.
I'm saying that, the answer is not to allow ownership of less than double digits in shares to be continually in charge of those companies. The reason they exited is because they wanted the cash and they knew it was time to move on. That's the reason. It's not because they were forced.
Why have they come back?
And so they come back because they still feel that by being back in charge, they are able to stop benefits to others, and those benefits come quietly slipping back to them, which you can see in every single case. When they come back, the freebies are higher, more, because the same toothless boards or the same independent directors very often don't stand up and blow the whistle themselves. You're waiting for other whistleblowers, which is wrong.
So therefore, I think all the points made here are very good points. And then there's accuracy. And I am concerned also about why, for example, the Infosys board did not reveal about, people kept asking about this Bansal,
and they refused to.
Bansal severance thing, and what was there that he deserved such a big severance package. This sort of thing should have been done. But I think let's look at it, step away a bit, and not look at the individual aspects of the individual story, but look at the whole way that India Incorporated needs to go in the future. And what happened in the early 20th century in the United States and little later in Europe was the fact that the family companies, especially in the US, UK, less so in Germany, and much less so in Japan and in France and Italy. France and Italy still have family-run companies. They don't have large enterprises, except public sector enterprises. And what happened in these cases was a professionalization that took place. Families or promoters decided that it would be in the best interests of the family.
But Gurcharan, over there, they maintained their shareholdings. In Europe and in Italy and France, you'll see that the family shareholding is substantially more than our...
Dabur is an excellent example right here in India. The family continues to retain its shareholding, but it does not, it sits once a week in Rouse Avenue. It calls the executive director, who is the point man from the family's prism. He is briefed on what needs to be done. The point man, in this case PD Naran, the executive director, then tells the CEO that this is what needs to be done. So there is an arm's length distance, complete arm's length distance between
it's not
the family and the actual executive management.
But Sandeep, these issues are beyond family, I would say. First, I would say that both the perception that Ratan Tata and Narayana Murthy are trying to hold on and not let go, I think is not right. They made a lot of effort into choosing a good professional to lead the groups.
It didn't work out.
It didn't work out, so they have a right to make an effort to change, which they did. I think let's go beyond family to founders of organizations. If you look at it in the e-commerce space today, you're seeing that the big investors, the global public private equity funds, SoftBank and Alibaba and Tencent, etc., they are playing with the boards and they are forcing acquisitions and mergers across different companies. So the question is that the investors and stakeholders have a right to do what they feel like. It's up to the board to be able to stand up for it and offer enough transparency to not allow people to question them.
But he who puts the money has the board member and should. You can't have the CEO in Infosys' case appointing his cronies or his friends.
Which is exactly what he did.
Secondly, you cannot have families appointing who they wish, as has happened in the second case.
But I think when Narayana Murthy erred, I think he was choosing a board which perhaps did not reflect. And one of the criticism against Infosys board is that everybody who was on the board was not from the industry, so their understanding of the industry was very, very limited, and therefore the chances of making mistakes were higher. However, I think he should have stayed on the board. I think a founder who wants to have a say should stay on the board.
Fine, then he has responsibility.
Correct.
I have no issue with that.
See, you ultimately had a chair, a co-chair, an executive vice chair. I mean, it's theater of the absurd. And I'm now fearful of one simple thing, which is that there is a non-disparagement agreement between Vishal Sikka and Infosys. Does that non-disparagement agreement allow details, actual details, which is in this case the Gibson-Dunn-Crutcher report, to emerge? So the battle perceptually may be over because we've toughed out Vishal Sikka, we've removed Kennedy, we've removed Lehman, all the cronies of Vishal Sikka, and I think several others will also go, including Rupa Kudva, but that's a separate thing. Now, will Nandan and the recast board actually bring the Gibson report and put it on the table and allow shareholders and the public to examine what exactly happened
So
there?
more transparency. But we'll take a short break. After the break, we're going to come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. We are here discussing the Indian boardroom and whether it's any different from our Indian political scenario. Mr. Das, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to just take a somewhat, we've discussed one particular issue, which is the institutional issue. The issue that I wanted to raise is, and what I felt frankly bad about, was the fact that here was a guy, this is Vishal Sikka, who was getting this institution, a fine company, future ready. He was showing a capability for innovation, moving the whole company one notch higher because of the tremendous disruption that's going on in this industry. I sort of applauded the fact that you had somebody with competence and a lot of, you need guts to move in that way.
And you know, this has been achieved In the case of HCL by Shiv Nadar, he stepped off the board, he plays as a shareholder, it's a family-owned company still, but you don't hear him he's not even available to come to a press conference. He says the CEO is in charge, the board is in charge, they've got to do it.
Right.
I'm not available.
Yeah.
So you have to let go.
And he's just
my point is that I don't see any...
He's focused on philanthropy, which he refers to.
My point
The
was
third generation.
Nandan's task is a very tough one, because he has to bring in a guy with the same capability that Sikka had. And that's a very rare capability, the ability to take risks. It's very easy to be critical of the mistakes a person makes, but the strengths the person brings, he could have, if he had succeeded and said, he could have taken Infosys to a totally different level.
Narayan Murthy never questioned his technical ability. He always said that, he's capable. He had questions of corporate governance.
All I'm saying,
but I agree with you.
I feel sad that India has lost.
But there is a flip side to all this, which is shareholder value and wealth destruction. Look at the Tata case. October 26 is when it broke, late October is when it broke. We did a study between October 26 and December 31st, when the battle was raging. Guess what the erosion in market cap of Tata companies was because of this international sniping? 91,000 crores. Who got it in the neck? Shareholders, like me, and maybe other people on this table. Infosys. Look at the pattern that emerges. On a Thursday, there is talk in the market that there will be a buyback at 1,050. The share price moves up. It moves up to 1,042. No, the buyback is at 1150. The share price moves to 1,042. Friday morning, Vishal Sikka quits. There's mayhem. The share price tanks. Between Friday and Monday, the share price actually ends at 870. 1150 is the buyback price, which is then certified on Saturday over the weekend by the board, which does not talk about Vishal Sikka's resignation, but it says that the buyback price is X. What did SEBI do? Nothing. What did SEBI do in the case of Tata's? Nothing. It is deep in the arms of Morpheus. It sat on its haunches. All it said is, we are studying the situation.
Well,
But do we want them to play a more proactive role?
Of course you should be playing a proactive role.
I thought that the whole idea of license Raj was not to have SEBI and other bodies.
If the share price
shareholders are being hurt, somebody has to stand in. And I think that what is going to happen in India, if we are to move in the direction that Mr. Das is saying, you have to have shareholder groups using specialist analysts who will want to bring whistleblowers report in, who will demand
which is exactly what has happened in the Raymond case.
Yeah.
In the Raymond case
that has happened.
This J.H. Patel, who is a minority investor, who owned about 5 or 6% of the company, he ran a campaign against Gautam Singhania. Okay, we were part of that campaign because a lot of it was sourced to us, and then we ran all the stories. Imagine what happened. The auditor had to be changed. The CFO had to be sacked. So there is accountability.
Because shareholders get together.
Exactly. I think you will see more shareholder activism in this country.
And that is what SEBI should be encouraging.
That shareholder could be founder, promoter, minority shareholder. It could be of different hues. Institutional shareholder.
But I think that the key thing is that accountability of the boards has to go beyond
they cannot be yes men anymore.
They have to be, the company and the management has to look at much wider level category of institutions.
Independent directors have to be
they are accountable to. Today, they feel that minority shareholders, as they're saying, virtually have no say. So, can boards be more responsible? Can they be more transparent? And I think we still have a long way to go on that.
Well, the new, as Dilip said, the new company law, the new legislation that has come in, that goes a long way. It's though ultimately a question of character of the people involved who have to implement the governance.
Mr. Das, I can give you two examples of two famous journalists who were appointed to the board of Larsen & Toubro and ITC, two of the biggest companies in this country. Two famous journalists appointed by the finance ministry as independent directors, as government nominees. to these companies. It's happened in the last 2 years.
But at the
So
end,
there is no sense of accountability. Independent directors are a joke. People who head audit committees, as we saw in the Infosys case, as we saw earlier in the Satyam case, I am riding a tiger, I couldn't get off.
And you know, I think when this happens, when independent directors are a joke and SEBI is not a joke, and you hold them liable and question them, then independent directors are going to get frightened either to sit on boards or to not do their duty.
But you know,
and that's the direction.
The Prime Minister has taken a very important stand, and you know, his address to the Institute of Chartered Accountants was the first of its kind, where he told Chartered Accountants, as auditors and as CAs, you are responsible for signing off on bad numbers. And I think that sent a shiver down the entire ecosystem across the country, that now you cannot just sign off on any fraudulent deals and bad numbers.
so responsibility, accountability and transparency. I'm sorry, we're just out of time, so I'll have to end now. But thank you for watching this show. We'll see you again same time next week.